Alright, so we're going to talk about cutting here. And since I've already got this roll out here, we're gonna pretend like this is a piece of bread. Um, and actually, let's go ahead and do this. Right now, we're going to first pretend that this is a piece of meat. And I want to butterfly it. Which butterflying just means to cut the meat horizontally in half and then open it up, keeping that seam on the edge. And then that way you have a thinner piece of meat, cook faster and that type of thing. You could also be doing this technique for if you're doing like a cordon bleu, where you're going to need to roll up chicken as if it was a wrapping, right? Yes, I know I overemphasized the cordon bleu. So to do this kind of cut, guys, and I'll follow it up with the blueberries here in a second. I don't have any tomatoes right now or meat that I want to cut. First of all, you notice that I've got a cloth underneath my cutting board. This prevents it from sliding down around suddenly. I never put these cutting boards into the dishwasher because the high heat is going to cause them to warp. I never put something hot on my cutting boards because that will cause them warp, and that's going to make them spin around, and it's also going to make it impossible for you to cut green onions and other thin things. So, and you'll also see potentially over here, I have this cutting board. It's red on the edges. It has a juice track. This is my cutting board for meat, raw meat, okay? And, you know, in a restaurant, they're probably going to tell you, well, they do tell you that you need to have a different color for each different type of meat. At home, that's probably a good idea, but I only have the one. If you're going to need to cut something hot, right? And I don't recommend cutting bread right out of the oven hot, and I'll go over that why in a second. But like a hot piece of meat, it's been sitting for a while, but it's still warm enough to warp your cutting board. Use a cutting board that won't warp, such as like bamboo or another type of wood. Just be mindful that if you're going to do that, that should probably be what that cutting board is designated for, is freshly cooked meat. And make sure that you wash it thoroughly. Don't soak it ever, because it's going to soak up that moisture. It's going to expand and crack and bind and all that, and you're going to ruin your cutting board. So, you know, just quick wash is probably good, and you probably want to do that right after so that the juices and the bacteria don't have a chance to seep into the wood. Now, for cutting butterflying or cutting something thin, and I'll do this with blueberries here in a second, but I'm going to take my hand, I'm going to put it on top of this, and I'm going to hold my knife parallel. Now I'm going to bring it over to the edge of the counter so that I'm not bumping my knuckle on the edge, right? Can you guys see that at all? Yeah, I guess so. And then I'm just going to start to cut in with mild pressure here. My blade should be slightly angled downward. And I've made that mistake before where it was slightly angled upward. And so knives sometimes have this tendency to migrate somewhere that you didn't want them to go. And if they migrate up, your hand is there. So you really want to control that migration and make sure that's going in a downward angle. Now, to come back and talk about cutting bread, now this is not going to do what, probably is not going to do what most breads do. Especially like high quality, like French bread, baguettes, and sourdough rolls or anything like that you might get or make. You're going to have this hard crust on the outside. And the biggest mistake I see people do when it comes to bread is that they're like, well, I have to break through this, so I'm going to muscle into it every single time. And let the blade do the work, and don't smush your damn bread, right? So, what's going to happen is that usually those lips are going to, like the cuts and whatnot, are going to be here on the top, and your blade is going to pull those lips open if you drag and pull in the wrong direction. So when I'm cutting this way, since the lip is going to be here on this side, and it'll pull open if I come this way, I'm going to use an upward angle, and then when I get to the other side, I'm going to roll it down and do a downward angle. Upward, downward, upward, downward. Now, usually by here, when I get to the bottom here, notice I didn't do any pressure here. This is it's a roll, it's not a piece of bread. But I'll usually find that there's harder crust on the very bottom of the bread. And so, once I get here to the very bottom, this is where I'm going to add that muscle. I'm going to put some pressure on, and then I'm going to cut through that. Okay? So, but that upward downward angle thing, you're going to find that that's going to give you the cleanest cut. It's not something that's official. I didn't pick that up from anybody. It's something that I personally discovered. Now, since I talked about butterflying already, I'm going to take these blueberries, and because it's just what I have, I'm going to use a sharp kiwi knife, right? So it's a thin blade knife. You could use this knife. This will work just fine. But it's going to be the same technique. I'm going to put my palm over the top, and exactly the same idea. Blueberries are a little bit tough. That I want to make sure that if the blade migrates, it migrates down. Now, if your blade's not sharp, a lot of times what you're going to run into, see how nice those are? Cut perfectly in half. I'm going to eat one. So, that one was tart. I forgot what to say. Oh, yeah. Sometimes I'll have like tomatoes and my blade's not as sharp as I wanted it to be, and a lot of times I can dig in, but you're going to have these rows of untouched, cut on the outside, tomatoes or blueberries or probably not blueberries, but olives or something like that, where you're going to get to that point where you can't cut through. You can cut through the first one kind of, and you just have all these tomatoes that are stuck to your blade if you're using like cherry tomatoes. So what I'll do with that is, for one, use a fucking sharp knife. But I'll pull my knife out, and they'll usually be stuck to the blade, so I'll just turn my blade and finish like that. Right? There weren't tomatoes on there, and still I wiped them off. So that's basically that. So cutting things in half like tomatoes, that's the quick and easy way of doing it. Just make sure that your knife is going downward. Now, I'm going to go on to green onions, because I do need those for tonight. And I really should have had a bowl. I'm going to grab a cup, though. So, for doing green onions, I don't like to use the tips, right? So I'll cut that off and discard it. Okay, it's just because, sometimes that's where bacteria can gather and all that. Now, a thing about produce, especially during COVID, I find it to be the most dangerous thing you can put in your body. As far as like being able to pick up disease, you're eating something that is not cooked, the bacteria is not killed, the virus is not killed. So wash all your produce, and I even wash the ones that say washed and ready to eat. Partially because I read an article a while back by a chef who, or a food safety expert who said that he would never eat those because even if it's 90% of the bacteria is killed at the time that was packaged, that other like 5 to 10% that's left over is going to propagate all over your produce. So nothing is ever 100% clean, nothing is ever 100% safe. So I always wash it. A lot of times I'll put it in a strainer so it doesn't touch the sink, because sometimes there might be bacteria that's sitting around in the sink that from like chicken or fish or something that you've been processing in there, or you just wash dishes, whatever. So I don't necessarily do that. Now, generally speaking, for this particular technique, I'm going to cheat a little bit, or I'm going to do this a little bit differently than I normally would do it, because I'm using green onions and not a carrot or something along those lines. But my hand posture is like this, okay? My thumb should be tucked away. That's going to be the one of the first things that's going to be cut, right? And generally speaking, like, I'm going to put my thumb at the end of whatever I'm cutting, and then I'm going to keep my middle knuckle in front of the tip of my finger, right? And I'm going to draw my hand back and push with my thumb as I'm cutting. And that's going to give me a much thinner cut. It's going to give me much more control. And I will show you that in a moment, but for right now, because these are longer than my grip, I'm not going to do it here. Now, if I'm doing a carrot, what I'll do, and these are going to be cut a different way, so I'm not going to do it with the carrots right now, but I will cut it to that length, right? So I'm going to cut it in half. That way I can get the proper posture here and come on down. So my green onions, they're not going to go anywhere. They're pretty stable here. So my thumb is hidden around the back here. My knuckles are like that, right? So you see my middle finger, the knuckle is further out than my tip. I see this a lot where people will collapse their fingers down like that, and what's going to happen is you're going to cut your damn finger off. And I did it for a long time. I've had cuts on every single one of these nails. Sometimes they've gone through. So you cut yourself enough times, you say, fuck it, I don't want to get cut anymore. So we go into here. So I've got my knuckles out the furthest, right? And with green onions, because they are thin, I need to make sure that my blade moves through them, right? It's not enough to cut down. Well, this knife is sharp, apparently. But it's not enough to cut down because you'll end up with this bullshit, right? Where that you only cut through the top half and the bottom half isn't cut. So the way that you mitigate that Now, you saw me go back and do something there, but what happened was that I'd gone down and I kind of missed one, and then I kind of lifted it up and I didn't go high enough to clear that. So make sure that you're going high enough. But even so, guys, I'm not going higher than that knuckle, right? I'm just going high enough to clear my veg. And you see I'm moving my hand here because, you know, my thumb's getting put into danger. This one, right? That top one just really wants to get in the way. Now I'm going to show you what I do here, but right hand, you guys, I'm going to come over here. So you see my thumbs at the very end here. My middle finger knuckle is the most proud. And I'm just drawing my finger back or pushing my produce forward. And I'm going to stop there. Now, you can go pretty close here. Just be very mindful that when you go through that you're not tucking your thumb under, because that's another area that you're going to get cut on. And I usually keep these parts and I will soak them in water for about a day, just the bottom, so that the roots can become more developed. You'll find that it's going to start getting new growth, and then I put it in the greenhouse. So, there we go. We'll save those guys for later. Now, let's go ahead and talk about cutting round bullshit. So, I don't like to keep the outsides on. I think that's where all the bacteria and crap is on these, so I'm going to go ahead and grate these. Now, something I learned again by cutting myself, and I'm probably not going to use these guys for the rest of the day, so put those away. So, what I'm going to do, what happened to me is I was holding it, and I came back and I took off my nail on that backstroke. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the carrot in two halves. I'm going to move away from my body, right? I'm just going to turn. Notice I'm not getting close to my hand. Again, bad experience. And then I just kind of check over. This little area is a little bit dark and not so great, and I'm not going to use it. So, and then I'm going to flip it and I'm going to do the other half. This is just a little bit of a safer way of doing it. It takes a little bit more time, but that hurt like a son of a bitch, so I'm not going to make that mistake twice. Alright, so now I got this cut. Now, a lot of times, you know, I might cut off this a little bit so I've got some of that end here, or I'm going to be here. I'm not going to keep this last piece because a lot of times I can't control it if I'm doing that type of cutting. Now, for what we're doing a road trip tomorrow, and I'm going to make some dip, and I'm going to use these as sticks. So, generally speaking, I'm going to go ahead and cut this into my two stick lengths, and then missed the spot. Woohoo! And because I'm doing sticks, I don't need to keep that in. So there we go. So before I start cutting anything, I'm going to put my fingers here, away from the blade, and I'm going to go down the length, and make a little cut there. Okay? So that totally works as a funky stick. So now I put that side down, and my carrot's not going to move out from underneath me. Okay? So I'm going to cut it down. See, very easy, very safe. My fingers were never in danger there. I'm just going to cut this into quarters, right? Nothing mind-blowing there, guys, but that whole, like, I'm going to cut off a little bit, a sliver here, that's barely a peel, right, is just so that I have this nice, firm foundation so the carrot's less likely to roll underneath and my fingers won't get in the way. So there, oh, nice cut there. Go. There we go. So I've got my little sticks for tomorrow. I'm going to do the same thing with celery. I don't think I'm going to do anything unique with the celery, so I'm not going to blow your mind with that. Now, bell peppers. The cleanest way to do bell peppers is I'm going to start close here, right? Now, again, I'm going to be doing these into chips, but I'm going to come outward, right, pretty close to the edge here, and then I'm going to move all the way down to the base. So you see, not a single seed in the piece that I'm working with. The seeds are all contained there. They're not going to go everywhere. Right? Okay. So I'm just going to do that all the way around. Right. Mind blown yet? Okay, I hope so. If your mind's not blown yet, wait till you see me with the watermelon. Okay? And so from here, this is kind of like something that I'm still toying around with. I don't like to cut this way. right, from the outside in. I like to go inside out. It just almost always gives me the cleanest cut, and you notice that I moved the blade along the edge here, right? So there are my little sticks here for my bell peppers. But the reason why this is kind of controversial to me is that bell peppers are round. They're not straight. So we get to like this piece right here, and I struggle to kind of get it a little bit flat. It's going to move around a lot more than I'd like it to. So I'm just going to be very slow, very careful with this so that I don't cut myself, and I don't like that little piece there. Come on. And so on and so forth. So there are my bell peppers. Yeah, I'm just going to torture you guys, but can you watch me do the rest of them? Running out of places to put things. It's okay. The watermelon. Now, same concept. I'm going to switch knives here. I'm going to go back to my Big Chef's knife because it's going to be the best knife for this particular project. Now, when I'm honing, by the way, I'm not coming towards myself. I'm actually more pulling the knife back. So my movement's perpendicular, and it moves up the honing rod with my wrist, right? So my forearm never gets closer to the honing rod. I probably should have said that in the last video, but hopefully people will watch both, right? So you see that my motion's mostly outward there. It's pretty good. I find that if you try to hone with a wet knife, so sometimes people at the restaurant, because they don't know better, will try to hone with a wet knife, and it just doesn't do as good of a job, and it ruins your honing rod. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take here, I'm going to cut off the base. Okay, boom, and I'm going to put it on there. Look, it's nice and stable. Okay, now I'm actually going to do both sides here. So notice my hand is nowhere near the blade. Great. All right. So I'm going to very carefully move outward, and I want to get close to the equator, right? The very middle of it. And you don't want to go too deep with this, guys. Notice like how much fruit is on there. It's very little, right? And so if you try to take off bigger chunks as you're going along, you're going to waste a lot more watermelon. This works for all melons, right? And, you know, if you like to keep the rind on, go ahead and keep the rind on. I'm not eating the watermelon. So, see, I'm getting a little bit greedy here, cutting off more than I intend to. I do try to remove, you know, a fair amount of that pith, but I'm not too concerned about it. I know it's bitter and all that, but it actually doesn't bother me. I actually kind of like it. I find it refreshing. So, round and round. Boom, boom. Okay. So you see how easy that was? Because I have two flat bases, it's not going to move around on me, and I'm going to be able to get through that really, really cleanly and easily. Now my hands are in a protected position. Come all the way down. And this part, you know, whatever you want to do, you can go this way first, you can go this way first. I'm going to do that first. And it's not moving around a lot, so I'm not going to worry about it. If you wanted to do it, you know, a little bit more safely, put it up like that, right? So you're on the flat edge. Notice that even though my fingers were not by the blade, I already took on that posture, right? So that when I got there, I'm not going to cut my knuckle. Now, generally speaking, for round things, and watermelon's big enough it's not that big of an issue, but for like a radish or something along those lines, I will cut up the ramp, flip it around, and cut up the ramp on the other side. And the reason why I do that is because the ramp is going to influence the blade down it, right? And if I'm on this side and my fingers are on this side and the blade does slip, it's going to go right into my my thumb or one of my fingers here that are on the downside of the ramp. So I'll flip it around so that doesn't happen. And same thing with the radishes, guys. I'm going to cut off a side, put it down on that side before I start my cut so it doesn't roll around, right? And generally speaking, guys, that's a lot of really, really great techniques there for you. So play around with those. Let me know what you think. If you guys have ones that I didn't cover here, that you're like, oh yeah, you should do this. Go ahead and say something because that's how we're all going to learn. So I hope this was helpful, guys. And so that's what I got for you as far as knife techniques go for right now. All right, guys, have a good afternoon.